If my ex called tomorrow, I'd leave you. The words hung in the sterile air of the therapist's office like a guillotine blade. He sat back, checking his watch, unaware that the sealed envelope in my hands contained the forensic audit that would destroy his career. I did not shed a tear. I simply realized this marriage did not need repair. It needed to be liquidated. My name is Harper Sinclair, and at 36 years old, I had learned that silence was often the loudest sound in a room. The air inside the therapy office in Center City, Philadelphia, was stale and recycled, chilled to a temperature that required a sweater even in July. A low, persistent hiss came from the air conditioning vent above, a mechanical respiration that filled the gaps in our conversation. Underneath that white noise, the only other sound was the scratching of Dr. Eris's pen against his notepad. It sounded like a thin knife slicing through dry leaves. I sat with my spine pressed explicitly against the back of the beige armchair, my hands resting in my lap, knuckles white as I gripped my leather handbag. Inside that bag, resting against a pack of tissues in my wallet, was a heavy cream envelope sealed with red wax. It felt hot against the lining, radiating a heat that only I could feel. Across from me, Logan Hartwell looked less like a husband fighting for his marriage and more like a man who had already closed a deal and was just waiting for the paperwork to clear. At 38, he wore his role as regional director of Red Crest Meridian Holdings like a second skin. His navy suit was tailored to within an inch of its life, and he sat with his legs crossed, arms folded over his chest, wearing that faint, pitying smile he reserved for waiters and me. He thought this was a game. He thought Dr. Eris was a referee he could charm. Dr. Eris adjusted his glasses and looked over the rim at Logan. Let us try a hypothetical. Logan, if there was one thing, one specific trigger that would make you walk away from this marriage tomorrow, what would it be? The question hung in the air for less than a second before Logan answered. He did not look at me. He looked at the diploma on the wall behind the therapist's head. If my ex called tomorrow, I'd leave you, Logan said. His voice was smooth, practiced, devoid of any jagged edges of guilt. He paused, letting the cruelty settle into the upholstery before adding, at least she knew how to keep up. I did not gasp. I did not cry. The tears that might have existed a year ago had dried up, leaving behind something arid and hard. I felt the blood drain from my ears, leaving behind a high-pitched ringing silence. It was a strange tranquility, the kind that comes right after a car crash stops moving, before the pain registers. The room felt suddenly vast, the distance between my chair and his expanding into a canyon. Logan shifted slightly, and his eyes darted down to the cushion beside his thigh. His phone was tucked halfway under the pillow, screen facing up. It buzzed once, a short, violent vibration. The screen illuminated for a fraction of a second. I saw the name clearly, Brianna. And right next to it, the small, damning silhouette of an airplane icon. He was not speaking hypothetically. He was speaking purely about logistics. Dr. Eris stopped writing. The scratching noise ceased abruptly. He looked from Logan to me, expecting a breakdown, expecting the hysterical sobbing of a wife who realizes she is second best. Instead, he saw my face. I watched his expression change from professional concern to a dawn of realization. He saw something in my eyes that did not belong in a couple's therapy session. It belonged in a courtroom. It belonged in a hostile boardroom takeover. I loosened my grip on my bag, very slowly, with the precision of a bomb disposal technician. I withdrew the envelope. The red wax seal caught the yellow lamplight. I did not open it. I simply placed it on the low coffee table between us, the heavy paper making a definitive thud that echoed louder than any scream could have. Logan frowned, his eyes flicking to the seal, confusion marring his perfect confidence. I met his gaze, my voice steady, though I let a small tremor of cold rage bleed into the edges. That sentence, I said, holding his eyes until he blinked. That sentence just collapsed everything you think you know about me. 7 years ago, Logan was not a monster. He was simply a man consumed by a hunger that he mistook for ambition. Even back then, he spoke in a vernacular of class and network, treating people like rungs on a ladder he was desperate to climb. I became his favorite accessory, a pretty ornament to stand silently by his side while he charmed investors with teeth that were too white and promises that were too big. I remembered the sheer exhaustion of being molded by him. It was a slow, grinding suffocation. He critiqued the way I laughed, telling me it was too loud for a steakhouse. He selected my dresses, always insisting on muted tones because he said bright colors made me look cheap. I learned to shrink, to quiet my voice, to become the beige background he required so he could shine brighter. He viewed my work as a coordinator for a community development fund with patronizing amusement. To him, my career was a hobby to keep me busy while he did the important work of reshaping the skyline. I remembered a dinner party 3 years into our marriage, where I tried to correct a misconception a developer had about zoning laws. Logan had placed a heavy hand on my knee, squeezing just hard enough to bruise. "Harper, honey," he had said, flashing a tight smile at the table. "Your little charity work is cute, really. But let the adults talk numbers tonight." Okay. I had clamped my mouth shut. I did not tell him that the little charity controlled grants larger than his entire department's annual budget. I kept my silence because of the promise I made to my late adoptive father. He was a man who understood the weight of true power, which is why he never flaunted it. Before he passed, he held my hand and gave me the only advice that mattered. "Don't let anyone love you for what you own, Harper," he had whispered, his voice raspy but firm. "Let them think you are ordinary. Only show your teeth when you need to kill the snake." So I let Logan believe I was ordinary. I let him believe he was the shark. When he proposed the prenuptial agreement, he was almost giddy with self-importance. He sat me down with a glass of cheap champagne and explained that he needed to protect his future assets. He was so arrogant, so sure that I was the liability, that he never bothered to read the clause regarding the strict separation of inheritance and trust funds. He signed the document that would eventually leave him with nothing but his arrogance. He assumed my life was small. On Tuesday mornings, when I left the house at 6 o'clock, he thought I was going to an early yoga class to maintain the figure he demanded of me. He never wondered why I took a large tote bag instead of a yoga mat. While he slept, I drove to a private boardroom across town. There, under the designation A. Sinclair, I sat as the authorized proxy for the trust that held the controlling interest in his parent company. I listened to reports about his division. I saw the macro view of the empire he thought he was conquering. I developed the habit of a tailor measuring a client for a funeral suit. I documented everything. I saved every email where he bragged about cutting corners. I noted every project where the numbers looked too convenient. I tracked the client entertainment expenses that occurred on weekends when no clients were in town. Then came the scent. It started 6 months ago. He would return from business trips to Chicago or New York, and his suit jackets would carry a faint, cloying smell of vanilla and stale smoke. It was a signature he did not know he was wearing. He stopped looking at me. He stopped touching me. He started hiding his phone. Most wives would have screamed. Most would have thrown clothes onto the lawn or demanded answers. I did neither. I washed his shirts. I ironed the scent of another woman out of his collars. I did not confront him because I was not weak. I was waiting. I needed the final piece of the puzzle to lock into place so that when the truth finally fell, it would not just break his heart. It would break his life. I was not interested in a scene. I was interested in a total audit. Dr. Eris did not let the silence linger. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together, his eyes fixed on Logan with surgical precision. The air in the room felt tight, stretched thin like a violin string moments before snapping. "Logan," Dr. Aris said, his voice level but demanding. "You need to explain that. Who is this X? And why did that specific scenario come to your mind so effortlessly?" Logan laughed, but the sound was hollow. He waved his hand dismissively, a gesture I had seen him use 1,000 times when brushing off a waiter or a subordinate. "Oh, come on, Doc," Logan said, shifting in his seat. "It was just a hypothetical. I was venting. You asked for honesty." "Right. Harper knows I get dramatic when I am stressed. She is just being too sensitive. It was a joke." "A joke," I repeated flatly. "Yes, a joke," Logan insisted, turning his charm back on, though the corners of his eyes were tight. "I mean, Brianna and I haven't been a thing for a decade. Harper, honey, don't read into it." I looked at him, really looked at him, stripping away the expensive suit and the title he wore like armor. I asked one single question. "Are you still in contact with Brianna?" Logan blinked. His gaze flickered to the left. He uncrossed his legs and recrossed them. "Harper, that is... Look, that is complicated," he stammered, his voice losing its polished edge. "We run in the same circles. It is professional courtesy. Don't make this into something it isn't." That was all the answer I needed. Professional courtesy did not send airplane emojis during a therapy session. His phone buzzed again on the cushion. He snatched it up, his thumb mashing the side button to silence it. But he was not fast enough. The screen lit up with a notification from an airline app. I saw the text clearly. Gate 12. Below, it was a departure time. Dr. Aris caught the movement. He looked from the phone to Logan's flushed face. "Logan," Dr. Aris asked, his tone dropping an octave, "are you preparing to leave this marriage, and not just the marriage, but your current life?" Logan ran a hand through his gelled hair, exhaling sharply. "I just need to get past this phase," he said, the mask slipping. "Once the merger is done, once I get through this week, everything will be fine. I just need to survive this." He spoke about our marriage and me as if we were a tedious administrative procedure. I was a hurdle he had to clear before he could get to the prize. I suddenly remembered the phrase he loved to throw at me during our budget arguments. "You have nothing to lose. Harper, I am the one carrying this family. I am the one with the risk." He had no idea. I stood up. The leather chair creaked, a final punctuation mark to the session. Dr. Aris held out the appointment card for next Tuesday. I took it. I clicked my pen and signed my name on the line. Then, holding the card up so Logan could see, I tore it perfectly down the middle. The sound of the ripping paper was satisfyingly loud. I dropped the 2 halves into my bag next to the wax-sealed envelope. I walked out of the room without looking back. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Logan caught up to me near the elevator, grabbing my elbow with a desperation that felt rehearsed. "Babe, wait," he pleaded, dropping his voice to a stage whisper. "Don't be like this. I was just stressed in there. You know how therapy gets to me. Let's go get dinner. We can talk." I looked at his hand on my arm, then up at his face. I pulled my arm away, dusting off the fabric of my sleeve as if he had left a smudge of dirt. "No, Logan," I said. "From now on, you are going to see exactly what it means to keep up." The conference room at Marston and Vale LLP smelled of mahogany and old money. It was a scent that intimidated most people, but to me, it smelled like safety. I sat across from Naomi Vance, my personal attorney and perhaps the only person in Philadelphia who knew exactly who I was. With a steady hand, I finally broke the red wax seal on the envelope I had carried out of the therapist's office. Inside were the documents that triggered the activation of my late adoptive father's trust fund. The trust did not just hold money. It held the controlling block of anonymous shares in the parent company behind Red Crest Meridian Holdings. Logan walked around Redcrest like he owned the place, bragging about his corner office and his quarterly bonuses. He had no idea that the chair he sat in, the building he managed, and the brand he represented were effectively owned by the wife he told to shut up at dinner parties. Read the addendum. Harper, Naomi said, tapping a manicured fingernail on the third page. I looked down. There it was, written in bold text, the fiduciary integrity clause. If I use these voting rights for personal vendetta or without cause, I read aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. My voting rights are suspended for 12 months. Exactly, Naomi said, leaning forward. She looked at me with eyes that were sharp and terrifyingly intelligent. Your father knew you might be tempted to use this sword in anger, so here is the rule. If you want him gone, you cannot fire him because he is sleeping with his ex-girlfriend. You cannot fire him because he humiliated you in therapy. You have to fire him because he is a liability to the company. She paused, letting the weight of the strategy sink in. Harper, listen to me, Naomi continued, her voice dropping lower. If you hunt him because he broke your heart, you lose. If you hunt him because he broke the bylaws, you win. We need to be surgical. I nodded slowly. The anger in my chest cooled into something solid and functional. I don't want to scream at him, Naomi. I want to audit him. We spent the next 2 hours constructing a 3-tier trap. It was beautiful in its bureaucratic violence. First, we initiated an independent forensic audit. Second, we established an encrypted third-party whistleblower channel accessible to all Redcrest employees. Third, and most dangerous for Logan, we ordered a line-by-line reconciliation of client entertainment expenses against his actual calendar location history. Leave the adultery out of the file, I instructed, my pen hovering over the legal pad. I don't care if he took Brianna to Paris. I care if he charged the flight to the development budget. We look for metadata. We look for timestamps. We look for forged approval signatures. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, I sent a calendar invitation to the entire executive board of Redcrest Meridian. I did not mark it as urgent. I did not use capital letters. The subject line was deliberately boring governance alignment review. It sounded like a routine policy refresher. In reality, it was a summons to an execution. While the email server processed the invite, I looked at Naomi. File the divorce papers, I said. Do you want to ask for alimony? Naomi asked, her pen ready. Given his current salary, you are entitled to substantial support. No, I said immediately. No alimony. No spousal support. I want a strict separation of assets exactly as outlined in the prenuptial agreement he made me sign. He wanted to keep what was his fine. I will keep what is mine. That night, I stood in front of the mirror in the master bathroom. The house was quiet. Logan was still out, presumably at a business dinner that involved no business. I looked at my reflection. For years, I had seen a woman trying to shrink. Tonight, I saw someone else. I realized I did not need revenge to validate my worth. I did not need to make him suffer to feel better. I just needed to remove the corruption from my life. It is not war, I whispered to the glass, watching my own eyes. It is just taking out the trash. Logan Hartwell was a narcissist, but I had made the mistake of forgetting that he was also a survivalist. He did not wait for the audit to begin. He struck first. On Monday morning, before I had even finished my coffee, a notification from the Redcrest Human Resources Department landed in my secure inbox. It was a formal internal complaint filed by Logan. He accused me of abuse of power and creating a hostile work environment stemming from a domestic dispute. He was framing my governance review as the vengeful tantrum of a scorned wife. By noon, the narrative had leaked outside the building. A local financial blog, the Philly Ledger, published an anonymous piece with a headline that made my stomach turn. New heiress takes control, starts purge over broken heart. The article painted Logan as a martyr, a high-performing executive being bullied by nepotism. The impact was immediate. The stocks for the Red Crest ecosystem wobbled, dipping nearly 4% in 2 hours. Walking through the corridors of the headquarters felt like walking through a minefield. Conversations stopped the moment I entered a room. Middle managers, people who had smiled at me at the Christmas party, now looked at me with suspicion. They did not see a leader. They saw a woman with a grudge and a loaded gun. My phone buzzed with a text from Logan. "Harper, please. Let's not do this. Don't make a big scene. We can handle this privately. I just want peace." I almost laughed. While he was texting me about peace, my surveillance reports showed his call logs. He had spent the last hour on the phone with the vice president of Kinsley Harbor Group, our biggest rival. He was not asking for peace. He was begging for a lifeboat. He wanted to jump ship to a competitor before my audit found the leaks in his hull. "Do not engage," Naomi warned me, pacing my office. "If you fire him today, or even publicly rebuke him, he wins. He will sue you for retaliation, citing that blog post and his HR complaint. He built a shield, Harper. We have to break the shield before we stab the knight." I did not issue a press release to defend my feelings. I issued a single, cold statement to the board and the public. Third-party auditing is standard procedure during any transfer of ownership control. Then, I deployed the weapon Logan was not expecting. I opened the transparency line. It was an encrypted, anonymous whistleblower channel managed entirely by an independent law firm, not by Red Crest HR. I sent a memo to every employee in the company, from the janitors to the C-suite, guaranteeing zero retaliation for any information regarding financial irregularities. I expected silence. I expected fear. 30 minutes later, the system flagged 9 separate reports. I sat with Naomi as the data started to populate on the secure screen. It was an avalanche. There were complaints about vendors being forced to pay kickbacks. There were notes about overtime pay being erased from the system. But the 8th report made the blood freeze in my veins. It was short, written in nervous, clipped sentences. "Don't just look at Logan. He is just the face. Look at who approves the numbers. Logan can't hide money alone." I scrolled down to the bottom of the allegation. The whistleblower had named a specific accomplice. Grant Rourke, Regional Finance Director. I stared at the name. Grant. Logan's college roommate. The man who had toasted us at our wedding, calling Logan the most honest man he knew. The man Logan referred to as his brother in arms. "My God," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. It wasn't just incompetence. It was a conspiracy. Grant Rourke. Naomi read the name aloud, her voice devoid of surprise. "The man who signs off on the audits. The man who is supposed to catch the fraud. Is the one helping him bury it." I looked at the screen, my vision sharpening. Logan thought he was fighting a divorce battle. He did not realize he had just dragged his best friend into a federal crime investigation. "Pull Grant's file," I said to Naomi. "If Logan wants to play the victim, let's see how he plays without his goalkeeper." Kepler Forensics operated out of a windowless sub-basement room that hummed with the aggressive cooling of server racks. It was a sterile, blue-lit cave where secrets went to be dissected. I stood behind Miles Cade, the lead forensic accountant, watching his fingers fly across a mechanical keyboard. Miles was a man who looked at spreadsheets the way priests looked at scripture, searching for sins hidden in the margins. "Harper, look at this," Miles said, pointing to a graph on the oversized monitor. "This is your husband's key performance indicator for the last 3 years, specifically his occupancy rates." I leaned in. The line was a perfect, steady ascent. It had no dips, no seasonal adjustments, no market corrections. "It is beautiful," I murmured. "It is impossible," Miles corrected, spinning his chair around to face me. "Real estate is organic. It breathes. Tenants leave, leases break, markets dip. But Logan has posted 12 consecutive quarters of growth without a single downward fluctuation. In statistics, we call this a unicorn. In forensics, We call it a lie. Miles minimized the graph and pulled up the raw cash flow data. The reality was far uglier than the pretty chart Logan presented to the board. There were massive gaps in revenue. He was bleeding money, Miles explained, tapping the screen. But look how he plugged the holes. Here, here, and here. Every time he missed a target, the maintenance budget for his buildings was slashed by exactly the amount needed to cover the shortfall. He was taking money meant for fixing elevators and HVAC systems and recategorizing it as projected income by shifting dates into the next quarter. But the system blocks that, I said, frowning. The accounting software has locks. You cannot just move money from a liability column to an asset column without an override code. Exactly, Miles said. The smoking gun isn't the number. It is the permission. Who pushed the override button? He typed a command, and a list of login timestamps scrolled down the screen like a waterfall of digital guilt. These are the override logs, Miles said, his voice dropping. Logan's profile was modified 40 times in the last year. But look at the timestamps. 2 in the morning, 3:15 in the morning, 4 o'clock on a Sunday, and look at the IP address. I read the location tag Internal Finance, Terminal 04. That is not Logan's computer, I whispered. No, Miles confirmed. That is the terminal for the regional finance director. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the server room's air conditioning. Grant Rourke. Logan hadn't just been lucky. He hadn't just been charming. He had been manufactured. He was a product that had been photoshopped by his best friend. Logan was not a rising star. He was a hollow suit propped up by cooked books. We recovered a deleted email from Logan to Grant, sent 6 months ago, Miles said. Opening a text file. The subject line was help. The body of the email was pathetic and damning. Grant, I am short $50,000 on the metrics for the quarterly bonus. Can you translate the elevator repair fund into tenant retention revenue? Again, I need that multiplier. I stared at the words. Translate? A polite word for theft. Do we add Brianna to this? Miles asked, looking up at me. I found payments for her consulting firm that matched the dates of these overrides. I shook my head firmly. No, leave the girl out of the main report. If we bring in the mistress, Logan screams about a scorned wife. We stick to the math. The math does not have feelings. Naomi, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped into the light. She looked at the screen with a predator's satisfaction. This changes the game, Harper, Naomi said, placing a hand on my shoulder. If we prove he committed fraud to trigger his performance bonuses, he does not just lose his job, he loses his severance, he loses his stock options. That financial lifeboat he is trying to paddle to Kinsley Harbor. We are going to poke a hole right through the bottom of it. The betrayal of the heart is a dull ache, but the betrayal of the mind is a sharp surgical cut. I thought I had reached the bottom of Logan's deception with the financial fraud, but Miles Cade dug deeper and found something that made me physically nauseous. Harper, Miles said, his voice unusually gentle as he turned the monitor toward me. We ran a semantic analysis on Logan's visionary strategy proposal from last year, the one that got him the cover of Commercial Builder magazine. I looked at the screen. The text was highlighted in red, showing a 90% match with another document. It matches a draft paper you wrote for the community fund 3 years ago, Miles said. I stared at the glowing words, mixed-use resilience corridor. I remembered the night I created that concept. We were at a diner after a late movie. I had sketched the diagram on a greasy paper napkin. Excited about integrating affordable housing with commercial retail, I remembered Logan laughing at me, wiping ketchup from his lip. Harper, babe, he had said, tossing the napkin aside. That is naive. No developer cares about resilience. They care about rent per square foot. Stick to your charity work. He had called it naive. Then he had waited until I fell asleep, opened my laptop, and stolen it. The metadata is clear. Miles continued. The original file was accessed from your home IP address at 1:12 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 8 a.m. the next morning, Logan had pasted it into his company letterhead and sent it to the CEO. I felt a cold fury settle in my stomach. He had not just used me as a wife, he had mined me as a resource. I immediately called a confidential listening session with the 6 department heads who reported to Logan. I held it in a secure conference room, phones off. I laid the evidence of the stolen proposal on the table. "I know," I said, looking at their fearful faces. "I know he takes credit. I need you to tell me how much." The dam broke. For an hour, I listened to seasoned professionals describe a culture of intellectual theft. The marketing director stood up, her hands shaking. "He took my entire slide deck for the Q3 presentation," she said, her voice trembling with pent-up rage. "He changed the title slide, put his name on it, and told me that if I complained, he would write me up for insubordination. He erased my name from the architectural credits," the head of design added. But the true twist came not from inside the room, but from a notification on my phone. A message from an unknown number popped up. "I have the recording. Can we make a deal?" I stepped out to call Naomi. "It is Brianna," I said. We did some digging. It turned out Brianna was not just a nostalgic ex-girlfriend. She was a contract consultant for Kinsley Harbor Group, our biggest rival. Her specialty wasn't romance, it was corporate headhunting and client migration. She wasn't sleeping with Logan just for old times' sake. She was coaching him on how to steal the tenant list. Miles confirmed it 10 minutes later. He plugged a USB drive into his terminal yesterday. He copied the entire lease database. He is planning to take the clients to Kinsley Harbor in exchange for a signing bonus. But thieves have no loyalty to each other. Brianna had realized the ship was sinking the moment I launched the audit. She was cutting Logan loose to save her own license. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop 3 blocks away. She looked tired, her designer coat pulled tight as if to shield her from the mess she had helped create. She slid a digital recorder across the table. "I want immunity," Brianna said, her voice low and fast. "I want a non-prosecution agreement regarding the data theft. In exchange, you get this." "What is on it?" I asked, not touching the device. "Logan," she said, looking down at her latte, drunk, bragging. He admits that Grant Rourke cleans the numbers for him. He admits that he planned to crash the stock price before leaving so Kinsley could buy it cheap. And, she paused, biting her lip. He says, Harper knows nothing. She is just a signature on a check. I looked at the woman who had helped destroy my marriage, and I felt nothing, no jealousy, no anger, just the cool detachment of a CEO negotiating a contract. "I don't care about your apology, and I don't care about your history with him," I said, sliding the agreement Naomi had drafted across the table. "You will testify about the entire network. You will give me Grant. You will give me the Kinsley contact. I don't need revenge, Brianna. I need a cleanup." She signed the paper with a shaking hand. I took the recorder. I finally had the voice of the ghost in the machine. The hearing for the emergency injunction was held in a small, wood-paneled courtroom that smelled of furniture polish and anxiety. Logan had filed a motion to halt the internal investigation, citing conflict of interest and malicious prosecution stemming from domestic litigation. He stood before the judge, wearing his most sincere blue tie, trying to sell the narrative of the deceived husband. "Your Honor, this is not a corporate review," Logan pleaded, his voice cracking just enough to sound sympathetic. This is a personal vendetta. My wife hid her identity from me for 7 years. She is the heiress to the very company I work for, and she never told me. Now, because our marriage is failing, she is using her financial power to destroy my reputation. She is trying to humiliate me because I was unhappy." He looked at me with wet eyes. It was a masterful performance. He was trying to turn a securities fraud case into a Hallmark movie tragedy. Naomi Vance stood up. She did not look at Logan. She looked at the judge. Judge Holloway, a woman known for her lack of patience with theatrics. Your Honor, Naomi said, her voice crisp. Mr. Hartwell's emotional state is irrelevant. The timeline is not. The forensic audit was triggered automatically by the corporate bylaws the moment Mrs. Sinclair exercised her voting rights. It was approved by an independent ethics committee. Mrs. Sinclair has recused herself from the day-to-day oversight of the audit. She is the one feeding them the lies, Logan interrupted, gripping the table. Naomi ignored him and placed a thick binder on the judge's bench. We are not submitting evidence regarding the breakdown of the marriage. Your Honor, Naomi continued, we are submitting evidence regarding the breakdown of the accounting standards at Redcrest Meridian. Specifically, the discrepancy between the reported key performance indicators and the actual cash flow. She opened the binder. This is not about adultery, Naomi said. This is about math. Here are the override logs from the finance server. Here is an email from Mr. Hartwell to the finance director asking to move funds again to cover a deficit. Logan paled. He had expected us to play the cheating husband card so he could claim privacy violation. Instead, we were playing the embezzlement card. Naomi then played her ace. We also have a sworn affidavit and digital recording from a witness, Ms. Brianna Cole. Logan flinched. He looked at his lawyer, panic flaring in his eyes. Ms. Cole does not discuss their romantic relationship in this affidavit, Naomi clarified. She discusses Mr. Hartwell's instruction to copy the tenant database onto a personal drive. In the recording, Mr. Hartwell is heard stating that he needs to bribe the coefficient of his bonus structure. Judge Holloway looked over her glasses at Logan. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Mr. Hartwell, the judge asked, her voice dry. You claim your wife deceived you by hiding her family connection to the company. Did she sign a false name on the marriage certificate? No, Your Honor, Logan stammered. Did she actively lie to you when asked about her assets? I never asked, Logan admitted, his face flushing. I assumed she was just a social worker. So, the judge said, leaning back. You simply did not take enough interest in your wife's life to know who she was. Were you legally forbidden from asking your wife about her family or her finances? No, but injunction denied. The judge banged the gavel, the sound sharp as a gunshot. The investigation is necessary to protect the shareholders and employees. This court finds no evidence of malicious intent, only evidence of significant financial irregularity. As the bailiff moved to clear the room, Judge Holloway added one final devastating remark. And Mr. Hartwell, since you attached the notification of the audit to your public filing for this injunction, you should know that the details of the investigation, including these allegations of fraud, are now part of the public record. Logan froze. He had tried to stop the train, but by standing on the tracks, he had ensured the whole world saw the collision. He had just made his own crimes searchable on the internet. I walked out of the courtroom, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. Logan stood by the double doors, looking like a man who had just realized he was holding a grenade with the pin pulled out. I did not stop. I did not look at him. I simply spoke to Naomi as we passed him. Now, we don't even need to leak it, I said, my voice loud enough for him to hear. He just filed the evidence against himself. The main conference room at Redcrest headquarters in Philadelphia was designed to intimidate. It had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline and a table long enough to land a small aircraft on. Usually, this room was reserved for the C-suite executives, the people with chief in their titles. Today, I had broken protocol. I had invited every department head, every regional manager, and every team lead. I wanted witnesses. I wanted to ensure that no matter how loud Logan screamed, he could not drown out the truth with a closed-door settlement. Logan sat at the far end of the table. He looked annoyed rather than afraid, drumming his fingers on the glass surface. Next to him sat Grant Rourke, whose complexion had turned a sickly shade of gray. Grant was sweating so profusely that his collar was already dark. "Let us begin," I said, my voice amplified clearly by the microphone system. "This is not a negotiation. This is a presentation of findings." I nodded to Miles Cade. The room darkened, and the projector screen came to life. "These are the maintenance logs for the Midtown properties," Miles explained, using a laser pointer. "For the last 2 years, tenant complaints regarding HVAC failures and elevator outages have increased by 300%. Yet, the maintenance spending in the ledger is zero. The money was allocated, but it was never spent on repairs." The screen shifted. "Instead," Miles continued, his voice devoid of judgment, "that capital was reclassified as efficiency savings and added to the net operating income. This artificially inflated the profit margin, which directly triggered the quarterly executive bonuses." A murmur went through the room. People were doing the math in their heads. Logan had let their offices rot so he could buy a Porsche. Then came the human cost. I did not have to force anyone to speak. The fear that had silenced them for years had evaporated the moment the judge denied Logan's injunction. Sarah, the head of property management, stood up first. She gripped the back of her chair. "Mr. Hartwell told me that if I submitted the repair tickets, my performance review would suffer," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "He said, 'Stop whining about the air conditioning if you want to keep your job.'" Then David from marketing stood up. He took my slides for the investor pitch. He erased my name. When I asked him about it, he told me I was lucky to be in the room. One by one, they stood. It was a domino effect of suppressed grievances. They spoke of stolen credit, of bullying, of being forced to sign blank requisition forms. I did not look at Logan. I looked at Grant Rourke. I clicked a button on the remote, and an email appeared on the massive screen behind me. It was a digital approval for a fraudulent fund transfer. At the bottom was the undeniable, encrypted digital signature of Grant Rourke. Grant closed his eyes. He did not say a word. He knew he was already buried. Logan, however, was not done. He stood up, slamming his hand on the table. The sound echoed violently. "This is ridiculous," Logan shouted, pointing a finger at me. "She is brainwashing you all." "This is a divorce, pure and simple. She is vindictive because I left her. She is manipulating the staff to get back at me for moving on." He looked around the room, expecting nods of agreement. He expected the boys' club to rally. Instead, he was met with absolute, stony silence. The men and women in the room looked at him with exhaustion. They were tired of his ego. They were tired of covering for him. "Sit down, Logan," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence, it sounded like a gavel. "We are convening an independent disciplinary committee. You will have the right to a defense. Every piece of evidence will be reviewed." Logan slowly sat down, but a strange, arrogant smirk crept back onto his face. He leaned back, crossing his arms. I knew that look. He was calculating his exit. He thought he had a parachute. "Fine," Logan said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Do your little review. Fire me. But you know the terms of my contract. If I am terminated without a criminal conviction, which you don't have, I walk away with the full severance package, 2 years of salary, full stock vesting." He smiled at me, a predator who thought he had found a loophole. "You can keep the company." "Harper," he sneered. "I will take the $5 million and go." I looked at Naomi. She was holding a thin blue folder. She slid it down the long table. It spun smoothly across the glass and came to a stop right in front of Logan. "Open it," Naomi said. Logan frowned. He opened the folder. "Do you recognize that addendum?" I asked. "You should. You lobbied for it 3 years ago. You told the board we needed to be tough on crime regarding expense reporting. You wanted to fire a junior analyst for expensing a personal dinner. Remember?" Logan stared at the page. It is the anti-fraud compensation clawback provision, I said, reciting the text from memory. It states that any executive found to have manipulated financial data to artificially inflate their bonus structure forfeits all severance, all deferred compensation, and all unvested stock options. The room went deadly quiet. We call it the Hartwell Clause, I said softly. Logan looked up. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like he was going to faint. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. He looked down at his own signature at the bottom of the page, the signature that had just cost him $5 million. You can't. Logan stammered, his hands shaking as he touched the paper. I wrote this for them, not for me. The rules apply to everyone. Logan, I said, even the author. With Logan silenced by his own signature, I stood at the head of the mahogany table. The room fell into a deep silence. I held the resolution in my hand, a single page that weighed as much as a guillotine blade. I did not shout. I did not tremble. I simply read the words into the official record. The board moves to terminate the employment of Logan Hartwell effective immediately for cause, I stated, my voice echoing off the glass walls. The grounds are gross misconduct, including the fraudulent manipulation of key performance indicators, theft of proprietary client data, violation of the corporate code of ethics, and infringement of intellectual property. Logan looked up, his face pale, realizing there was no money left to fight for. Panic flared in his eyes, and he darted his gaze frantically to the man beside him. "Grant!" Logan pleaded, his voice cracking. "Grant! Tell them this is a mistake. You approved the numbers. Back me up." Grant Rourke did not look at him. Before Grant could speak, the head of Human Resources stepped forward. "Mr. Rourke has been suspended pending an external investigation," she announced formally. "His files have been turned over to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the District Attorney's Office for review regarding accounting fraud." Grant slumped in his chair, putting his head in his hands. Logan stood alone. Naomi then cleared her throat. "We have one final item for the record. A communication received 10 minutes ago from Ms. Brianna Cole." Naomi read the text message aloud so the stenographer could type it. "I have handed over the full client logs and the recording of Logan asking me to solicit bribes. I am cooperating fully. I am not going down for him." Logan looked as if he had been punched in the gut. His face went slack. He realized that the woman he tried to leave me for had just sold him out to save herself. He looked around the room, seeing no allies, only faces of people who were tired of his tyranny. He turned to me, his eyes wide and wet. He tried to soften his voice, to conjure the charm that had fooled me for 7 years. "Harper," he said, taking a step toward me, his hands out. "Baby. Can we just talk privately? This has gone too far. Don't do this to me. I am your husband." I looked at him. I felt absolutely nothing. The love was gone. The anger was gone. There was only clarity. "You are not losing your job because of me." "Logan," I said, cutting him off with surgical precision. "You are losing it because your numbers were wrong." I looked at the board members. All in favor of termination, every single hand went up. Even the managers who used to laugh at his jokes raised their hands high. They chose the survival of the company over the ego of a bully. "The motion carries," I said. 2 security guards stepped into the room. They did not drag him. They simply stood on either side of him. Logan looked at the door. He did not scream again. He realized that his reputation was evaporating faster than the elevator could take him down to the street. He walked out in silence, a man who had become a zero in his own ledger. I did not waste time watching him leave. I sat down and began signing the orders. I signed the directive to return project credits to the teams he had stolen from. I signed the authorization to restore the maintenance budget for the buildings. I approved a new, transparent promotion path based on merit, not cronyism. Later that afternoon, I sat in the quiet of Naomi's office. The sun was setting over Philadelphia. I took the pen and signed the final page of the divorce papers. Next to it lay the prenuptial agreement he had forced on me, the document that ensured he left with nothing. I looked at the ink drying on the page. I remembered the therapy session. I remembered the cruelty of his voice saying he would leave me if his ex called. That sentence had been a bullet intended to kill my spirit. Instead, it had killed the marriage, but it had saved me. I capped the pen and smiled for the first time in months. I was finally free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear your thoughts. So please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from and what you would have done in Harper's shoes. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.